Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I'm your host, Jeff Howard, and I've got filmmaker Matthew Gratzner with me. Hey, Matthew.
Jeff, so good to see you and hear you.
Yeah, good to see you. We are on Zoom, so Matthew and I can see each other. We live far enough apart and yet both in the LA area that it just makes sense to use Zoom. So if you have complaints about the audio quality, we are blameless. Just blame the Zoom Corporation with their massive amounts of dollars. We'll just blame them. But I will just happily share that this is a nice quick turnaround for me. Matthew brought his film Mutiny with an exclamation point. I think it's important to mention the exclamation point because it's not mutiny, it's mutiny. And Mutiny played at Film Invasion Los Angeles in June, which was 2 months ago. Film Invasion 2022, Film Invasion Los Angeles 2022. And not only was it an official selection, but it took home the Filmmakers Award for Outstanding Short Film Comedy. And for those who don't know, the Filmmakers Award, that's a jury of filmmakers who have been at the festival previously. So that award comes from your peers, not, five cranky old pricks, who've been in it too long. Those are people with actual taste, not just a grizzled selection jury. We did do a Q&A at the theater, which was a lot of fun. But of course, at the Q&A, all we talked about was Mutiny. So today, we're going to find out about your inspirations. So I warned you. What got you into the film thing? Did you become a cinephile first and then a filmmaker? Or were you always playing around with video cameras as a kid? What got you into this?
Well, I'm old enough that they weren't video cameras. Super 8 would probably be more appropriate. So I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and I had parents that were an interesting combination where my father was a research scientist, a geneticist, and my mother was an artist. So it was a great combination of both analytical and creative. So both sides of my brain, or none of my brain being used, depending upon who to speak with. And I've always liked entertainment. I always liked films. And my parents, even though they were not in the film business by any means, would always include me in what they liked. So as a 4-year-old, they thought it was appropriate to be taken to the drive-in theater to see Blazing Saddles. I was 4, but they thought that was an appropriate film for 4-year-old. And every other film between in the same vein. They weren't a big fan of horror, or certainly not like slasher films of the 70s, but they never really looked at me as like, well, you're a little kid, you wouldn't like this. They didn't take me to kids' films. Like, I don't think I ever was taken to a Disney film as a child. It was, let's go see Blazing Saddles, let's go see Young Frankenstein, let's go see these big action movies or more adult films. As a 10-year-old, they took me to the film 10, the Blake Edwards film, which is clearly not for a 10-year-old. Maybe they thought that 10 was the age bracket, so they figured, oh, they'll just take me. So they thought that, Blake Edwards and classic filmmakers prior to that were an old James Bond films. They thought that was, I guess, appropriate. When at home, we would watch public television. So I was exposed to Monty Python and, of course, Fawlty Towers and like all these shows that, again, were not something you would necessarily see as I watched cartoons and stuff as a kid, but mostly my parents they always included me in that kind of entertainment. So it wasn't like separated out, like, oh no, you can only watch this. So that was sort of my exposure to entertainment. And I always liked the concept of visually telling stories. I would paint and draw and sculpt and build things. You make nowadays, if you're sitting in your house and building stuff and making costumes, you're considered like a cosplayer. I think when I was that age, you were considered a virgin because you weren't really, social and didn't have a lot of friends. So needless to say, I was at home making a lot of stuff and making little movies and telling my father to help me make little short films and stuff like that. And, but I really liked the creation process. So I did a lot of artwork when I was young. And then when I was in my teens, I got hooked up into a theater troupe, a theater group that did Renaissance fairs and private parties and all sorts of nonsense like that. And I shouldn't say nonsense because that actually gave me a tremendous appreciation for live performance. I was an actor, I got to direct, I got to make things, I could do all these things. And, you're in Miami, Florida. So aside from humidity and swampland, there's not a lot there, at least in the 70s and 80s. Then again, it became a drug trade. So there's plenty of things to do, I guess, if you were older. But nonetheless, as a kid, that was my thing. And it was exciting. So as a teenager, like from 15 on, I got to do things I had never done and associate with people I had never associated with. It was very theatrical. And in that process, I met a guy by the name of Robert Chapin. And we've been friends ever since. We're old friends. And his brother moved out to Hollywood and Bob did sword fighting and all that stuff like I did. And he was a really great guy. And his brother, Stuart, moved out to Hollywood. And then a couple years later, Bob moved out. And my then girlfriend and now wife, Shannon, he said, hey, for all the aggravation you have in theater work, you could have the same aggravation, frustration in Hollywood, but get paid for it. So that was kind of the introduction to the film business. So I never went to college. I didn't go to art school or film school. I had the chance to go to art school, and I opted not to. But doing the theater work, and I worked on a tall ship. It was the HMS Bounty that was built for the film Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962. I worked on that for a couple of years as a sailor, but really a tour guide. So I had all this kind of bizarre real world experience, which it seems like the best kind of experience, I guess, to have. And then I came out to Hollywood, and I had done props and I had made props and things in Florida for all the theater stuff I was doing. So that was kind of an easy transition to a degree. But I also came out and had the chance to do some acting, even though I had acted, and I sort of came out not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, because you got to imagine that in 1992, this is prior to the internet, this is prior to YouTube, this is prior to TikTok. So if you wanted to be in movies or entertainment, you came to Los Angeles. That's it. You weren't I'm going to make some stuff and put it on the web. There was no web. There was just you and a camera, and you got to get out there and do stuff. So I got a chance to go come out to Hollywood, and didn't know really many people, and sort of did some stuff out of the garage. I started working with a couple of folks and doing little props and that kind of thing. And then I still did a couple live shows and doing sword fighting and stuff with my friend Bob. And we did a couple Renaissance fairs. And then an agent saw me and thought oh, we'd love to rep you. We'd love to have you do an audition for our my partners. And I'll be honest, I didn't feel I was a good enough actor, and I wasn't really that passionate, even though I have a little cheesy bit part in Robin Hood Men in Tights. It's specialty extra work, but it was fun. I got my SAG card on that show, lots of stuff like that. So, long story short, I opted not to audition because I just was not as confident as an actor, and it really wasn't my passion because I really, really liked the making of things. So while acting, I think, is probably one of the most important things in a film. I mean, to be honest, without good performance, you got to start with a strong script, but without good performance and good performers, I don't care what the visual effects are or the stunts or the production design. If the characters are not compelling based on a compelling script, you really don't have much of a chance of success for a film or any kind of piece of entertainment. So I like the idea of making all this stuff. So I said, I really want to direct, but I didn't know how to get through that path because I didn't go to film school. I didn't have those associations. So I kind of went through a path that I sort of knew, which was making stuff. So I'm making props and models. And I start this company with my then girlfriend, my wife, Shannon, and another partner named Ian Hunter. And it was called, at the time, it was called Hunter Gratzner Industries. And we built miniature effects and art-directed visual effects, but mainly fabrication of miniature effects. And that kind of rolled into photography. Then we started a digital division, and then we started kind of producing. We started doing major photography for other films that needed, a second unit or, visual effects unit. And then we started trying to develop our own content. And we did that for a while. I mean, we had the company for 20 years, and we worked on some ridiculously great movies, really great opportunities, great filmmakers. And during the process, I would consistently try to direct commercials and shorts. And, that was where I still pushed where I really wanted to go. But the challenge is that I was a business owner. Now all of a sudden I'm focused on running a business. So now you're like, oh, this is great. I'm making all these things. I'm working with amazing directors and amazing film studios. And we're doing these great shows. And then I'm worrying about if the toilets are going to back up. And it's so you're a business owner. And that's where it's it's a bit challenging. And the big advice I give to everybody, especially young filmmakers or people trying to get into the entertainment business, if there's the thing you want to do, figure out the best way to do that thing, writing, directing, acting, producing, whatever it is, and get as close to that thing that you want to do. I was sort of, I wouldn't say it was a mistake, but I had sort of I'll just do this visual effects work and that'll kind of transition into being able to direct, because I'm directing these scenes that are visual effects. And you start to be known as, oh, that's the effects guy. It's like, well, I'm not the effects guy. I'm an effects guy, but I'm an artist and I do. So it's like, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You can't say, oh, I'm going to do all this other thing. And then just start writing, just regardless. Even if it's bad, just start doing it. Get an understanding of what it is, because you have to hone that craft. You have to hone that artistry. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of younger generations that are like, this is what I really want to do. And this is who I want to be. And then a month later, okay, now I need that job. It's like, well, but you got to spend years to craft that job and to understand what you have to do as an individual and learn as much as you can about it. So a bit long-winded, but yeah, so that's been sort of my path, and it continues to be my path because it's a hard business to work in. It isn't easy. There's all sorts of, like I said earlier, follow your dreams and work hard, and that's all well and good, but it's brutal. You have to really last through a lot of disappointment and highs and lows, and you have to have thick skin, and you have to take critique, which nobody's good at who's creative, or not good at, but it's hard to do. But yeah, so in the grand scheme of it, it's like, it's just about focus and staying on course of what you want to do and be passionate about it. But I had a lot of great opportunities, and I worked at a time, and I think this is sort of interesting. I always think about this. The time we worked in visual effects and film, which was basically the longevity of our company, Gratzner Industries, which became New Deal Studios in year 2000. It was 2000. So we had 20 years, so 95 to 2015. And what's interesting is that time, content, or I should say visual effects content, even though digital was starting to flourish, I always joke that I'm the only moron that would say, let's start a miniature effects company. Well, that's going to be pushed to the side. But we had this great opportunity where we were delivering sequences for major motion picture that was like just our company, or our company working with a company like Double Negative doing more elaborate animation composites, or ILM, or whomever. But we were delivering these big action sequences because it was primarily like in-camera effects work. Like nowadays, you look at a movie and there's like, you look at any Marvel film or Star Wars film, and there's got to be 7,000 people who work on the movie, and they're in London or Asia or Australia or Los Angeles or wherever, but it's all being parceled out throughout the country. So inevitably, what happens is you do have a piece of the film you're working on. But when we were working, it was literally like, okay, here's these sequences from, let's say, The Aviator. These crash sequence, we were helping to design it. We're doing the miniature effects. We were dealing with the photography. The visual effects supervisor was also second unit director from Martin Scorsese. Rob Legato gave us an amazing amount of opportunities, and he was terrific to collaborate with. But because he himself is a cinematographer, a lot of the effects leaned on, let's try to shoot it in camera. So it was a time that we worked on where it truly was like the old school movie magic, where we have a studio and we're building things and designing things and shooting them. And then later in the length of the company, we started doing the composite work and animation. But for the most part, we were doing these old school effects up and through, mid 2000, like I said before, it was 2015. And my partner Ian is still doing that, because after, excuse me, so we had I primarily worked with Martin Scorsese, and my partner Ian primarily worked with Christopher Nolan, and he had worked with him on the Batman films as well as Inception. And then Ian ended up working, doing the miniature effects work for Interstellar, ended up winning the Oscar. So even after that, Ian went on to the film First Man and won another Oscar, and those were primarily miniature effects too. So it's not like that whole side of it's completely gone or dead. It's just, it's not as prevalent. Practical work is just harder to do because A, there's not many people left who do it. B, really the main priority is studios now don't want to leave anything to chance. So a miniature effects sequence in a film, you've got to basically make that sequence before you make the film. You've got to conceptualize it. You've got to figure it out. You've got to figure out all the logistics. and then you go and shoot it, you go process and do it. Whereas with digital effects, you still have to do that, but digital effects, you can keep changing that until literally you're making like release. Well, you don't make release prints anymore, but you can literally be making that till you're doing your final color on a film. And so the few of the heads of visual effects I've talked to from the studios over the years, they're like, oh, we love practical effects, but we really don't want to do it because it doesn't give us much time to change stuff in post, which is true because you were locked into what you photograph. You can manipulate things digitally, but not the same. So practical had, I'm not saying it's dead and it's never coming back, but it takes a very specific filmmaker to understand how to apply that to a film. You really need to have the film in your head, preconceived as a vision, know how to design the shots, know how to figure it out, and then you have to commit to it. Because then once you've shot it and like, well, that's it. That's what and somebody like Chris Nolan, well, Chris has a really good understanding. So you do a movie like Interstellar, yeah, you can do all the ships as miniatures. And they still had some amazing amount of digital work, obviously the black holes and all of the starfield, everything that Double Negative did was terrific. They had a couple of digital shots of the ship too, but the primary shots of the Endurance in the film is in miniature. It's a giant, like it's 16th or 15th scale, I can't recall. But yeah, so that's probably a lot of talking for something that you asked me one question. But
it's a lot, but it's all interesting and good. And by the way, I'm glad because I was gonna almost jump in there for a second and say, because I know you keep referring to VFX, but yeah, I knew you were talking about practical. You were talking about good old fashioned miniatures. I totally get how that was born out of you being a theater kid, and because at the theater level, surely in Miami, yeah, you were doing everything. You were building sets, you were building props, all kinds of things. So yeah, that practical stuff. Yeah, it used to be every effects house did props and makeup effects, right? And it was the whole now when you talk about VFX, everyone just assumes you're a digital artist instead of working with practical physical stuff. But I also think, as you would probably point out, that the aesthetic of the miniature, the aesthetic of the practical effect, a lot of people still prefer it. It's almost right. It's almost like, well, I was almost going to compare it to people who still demand, like, I think, doesn't Nolan still use like 70 millimeter celluloid film instead of like it's almost an aesthetic choice that sort of makes it kind of, I don't know. But anyway, but what I wanted to hone in on actually.
No. You bring up well, go ahead. Okay, I'll answer that question, but go ahead. Hone in.
Well, you want to answer that question because I'm going to hone in on you because we could talk about the effects business for a while because actually, amusingly, I in my break between being involved in film personally and then being a film festival programmer, I worked at an effects and toy company. so I'm familiar with effects.
Oh, cool.
But
sure.
I was actually on the licensing side of things, but still. But the interesting thing, I was going to hone in on you and what interests you, because first of all, I think one of the more interesting and revealing things that you shared is that, you had been doing stuff on stage and backstage. So just like there's on stage, backstage, just like there's on camera and behind the camera. And you were balanced. It sounded like you were fairly balanced between both, but then you did make a conscious choice to step behind. You decided you referred to confidence in your acting, but also right passion. Like you didn't really have a passion to be on screen or be on stage. And you cared, was it the thing where you cared more about the quality of the project? And if you pulled yourself off stage and were directing or helping otherwise, the product would improve or the quality of the art would improve?
100%. As I said, I have so many interests in so many things, from not only, the writing of a script. How does it time? How does the dialogue play? Oh, what does the production design look like? How do the actors interact with the dialogue, with the sets? I love all of it. And I think that even as a visual effects company, we did everything. We were doing stuff where it wasn't just the effects. It was not just the design. It was, everything in between. So, but as a filmmaker, I really, really wanted to explore all of it. And I felt as an actor, I just wasn't like as passionate. And also, first of all, every job in the business is impossible. Everybody says, "Oh, it's really hard to get an acting job." It's like, is it hard to get an acting job? 100%. It's hard to get a directing job. Absolutely. Is it hard to get a job as a writer? Yes. It's all hard. So you have to find what you're the most.
It's hard to get started in effects, right? It's not like it's not like well, it's all a pyramid, right? And people from all over the country come to Los Angeles and they're like, I want to be a prop maker or something, and there's 1,000 people ahead of you who've been doing it longer.
But interestingly enough, the reason we ended up scaling our company back in 2015 was that LA, the film business kind of left LA. Sure, the development and the initial inception of films is in Los Angeles, but the making of films is in Atlanta, or at one time Louisiana, or the UK, or wherever anybody gets a tax credit or incentive. And I do understand that. It makes sense economically, but the business just isn't where it is. And so here, like it used to be. But yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. For me, it was about being able to have a big picture for the whole film. And I just really like, as a director, and this is my opinion, and I hope other people feel a little bit like this. Your job as a director is you may not be able to pick up whatever tool it takes to deliver whatever image you have to do, camera, pen for typing the script, but you have to know the jobs. You have to understand production design. You have to understand how stunts are created. You have to understand how visual effects are created. You have to understand all of that as a director because you're telling people what to do. And I've worked with some studio execs in the past, and their attitude sometimes as well. We'll surround them with really good people. It's like that. You need that, of course. You want people to lift you up, but you want them to lift up your vision. And if you don't know how to explain to somebody, well, this car chase should look like this. Well, I don't know, just show me something cool. It's like, well, then you're not really directing the film. Maybe you're directing the actors, which, by the way, is extraordinarily important. As I said, actors are the most important thing in a movie beyond, in conjunction with the script. But I have a little bit more of an older school opinion where, you really you should absolutely know everybody's job on the film. Doesn't mean you have to be good at it. Doesn't even mean you have to be even that competent, but you should know it and know how to explain to somebody, okay, we're going to shoot this set, and this is the lensing I'm going to have on this set, and I think that I'm going to end up shooting off the set if I don't do this, so this is going to be a digital extension, or this is going to be, it's that sort of thing of like, you think of directors like going back to Hitchcock, or of course, more recently Steven Spielberg, or Robert Zemeckis, or people who could get in there. Or Peter Jackson's another good example of someone who knows all the pieces and can get in there and shoot. They hire the best and brightest out there, the best crews, best people, but you have to know how to give them direction. And that's sort of, and it took me a long time I knew theater, and even the theater work I did was street theater, janky, little weird. I mean, I'm not putting on, a Hamilton or something. It was like little stuff, but it gave me a sense of audience reaction. And I think that's probably, if I had to pull anything out of those experiences, it would be to get a firsthand real world understanding and interaction of what worked and what didn't, primarily comedy or action, or even if it's silly stuff, you get a sense. I mean, stand-up comedians will say that all the time. It's like, when you're on stage and you're getting that response, hoping not bombing, but if you get that response and you're like, okay, that's working, that's not working, and you get a sense of, and you start to get a sense of people's timing. You get a sense of this, even maybe not this exact joke I'm telling, but you start to see where things work. And that, if I had to pull anything out, it was the best experience I ever got. It was being able to see a live audience and go, oh, this kind of worked. They react to this. And I've applied that to the films I've made. For better or for worse, but you get an understanding. Because making a movie is completely different than live theater, live performance. You're making a film. Number one, if you have jokes, nobody's supposed to laugh because you're going to pick it up on the recording when you're recording sound. But you're shooting stuff out of order. You're shooting stuff all over the place. Sometimes you've got specific shots you're shooting, and then if you have some sort of feel that wants to feel more inspired or improv, you're maybe just doing coverage. And so you're assembling this film in editorial. So it's a different experience. But if you have that innate understanding of what people like or want, then you at least have a better shot at, when you write a script or direct an actor, to get a sense of what will work and what will play.
Yeah, that is a major aspect of directing. It's funny. you just made me sort of come to the conclusion that I agree with everything you said completely. And obviously, yes, experience on stage does hone the instinct of what audiences appreciate and don't. And you made me realize that in a lot of ways, directors, because they can't do everything, of course, and it gets worse if they do too much. And of course, if a director doesn't understand a skill, to respect the skills of the people around them is huge as well. But in a lot of ways, the director is the first audience member, right? Like the director is the one watching and literally judging right then and there. If anyone else on that set thinks, well, that joke's not working, it's irrelevant. But the director is representing the audience on set and saying, ooh, that joke didn't work, we've got to try it a different way.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is, and it was, sheer happenstance, coincidence, just how life's path worked. The first film that I remember seeing, I was young, I was 4, was Blazing Saddles. I came out to Hollywood, and then like the first film that I was hired to be, and again, it's like specialty extra, but because I looked mean and angry, they put me next to one of the lead characters, and I just was like, oh, you're the sheriff's henchman, who's the Robin Hood Men in Tights. But it gave me I was on the show for 6 months, because once you get established on a movie, they can't not have you. So once you're in a scene, you're in every scene. So it was great. And what it did was I'm on set watching Mel Brooks direct. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Because you see what works, what doesn't work, why it's working, what he thought was funny or what he thought didn't work as well. And that, again, another crazy experience where it was just happenstance. And, 90% of the time I'm standing around not doing anything, but I was in the movie doing and because I had other skills, I could do archery, like I'm shooting flaming arrows in the opening credit sequence and other goofy things. But it was like another experience of, I'm 22, 23 years old and getting the opportunity to be on a major Hollywood film on major sets and watch how stuff is put together. And it's really, because I'd never been on a movie set in Miami. Even they shot Miami Vice when I was like a teenager and stuff. I never went to the set. It's not something I was like, you can't just like show up, kind of thing. But yeah, so it's about your comment, the first audience. You're absolutely right. The director is sort of the first audience, because they're seeing, okay, the actor said this line this way, or this joke, or this blocking is this. How is that going to play in this scene? How is that scene going to play in this first act? How is that first act going to play in the whole film? And how does it work? And that's where, because as we talked about a little bit ago, you're shooting out of order. That's another thing a lot of people don't realize if they've ever made a movie. It's not like, okay, I'm going to start at scene 1, and then by the end of our schedule, I'll be at the. Wow, you're shooting like the end of the film, sometimes in the beginning, and it's all over the place. And because it can be location dependent, actor dependent. You never know. So you're always trying to make something work. It could be weather dependent. I had the good fortune to be on Shutter Island, and we did a lot of the visual effects and the Lighthouse and a bunch of stuff like that. And I got a chance to be on set for. Originally, I was just I was on as the visual effects supervisor for New Deal Studios, and I worked on the show for a while, in early development, and then when they were shooting, I was brought out for doing survey work for the effects work we had to do. And Rob Legato, the second unit director, was like, look, we're getting a lot of stuff from first unit kicked to second unit, so I'm going to be directing, fill in for me for a couple days on set first unit as the supervisor. Now, that's a daunting responsibility, because now all of a sudden, it's one thing to own a company and be delivering shots, but now I'm the guy who has to stand next to Martin Scorsese, that's going to work, or that's not. And it was a ton of stuff. And then that 2 days became like almost 5 weeks, because every day it was, we're getting more work. We still have to shoot these shots. And it was just, you're trying to finish the movie. So it was a tremendous experience, but it was one of those moments where you're looking at things from a perspective of, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And as I said, it's sort of opportunity. So I was very fortunate in that. But yeah, it's just as a director and as a filmmaker, a couple things you're doing. One, you have to understand that filmmaking is a series of compromise. You do everything you can to plan every single possible thing, and you think of everything that could go wrong, and you think of everything that could go right, and you hope to goodness that it all works out. But then you also have to have the ability to roll with those punches. You have to know that no matter how much you plan, something can change, and then you can't be disappointed when something doesn't work exactly as you expected. But my biggest advice to anybody trying to make a movie or do anything is you've got to plan. I always say I make the movie before I make the movie, right? Whatever I'm doing, I try to make it beforehand. In other words, make sure the script is watertight. Make sure you've storyboarded everything you can. Make sure that every bit of the film is processed and worked out so that when you're on set shooting and you're making this thing, it's about execution and not discovery. It's great to discover moments with actors. They may want to do the blocking differently and have a different take on a line or something happens, and that's great. You should encourage that. But you shouldn't be trying to figure out, I don't know how I'm going to shoot this scene. Well, I mean, if you have the ability to have a 70, 80 day shoot schedule, that's terrific. But if you don't, well, you really want to be prepared because remember, it's somebody else's money to begin with. It's never your own. And unless you're making shorts, and it is your own. But more importantly, you have a crew of anywhere from, on a short film, 20 people to on a feature film, 300 or 400 people. And they're all looking to you for the answers. So you have to have an answer for everything. You've got to know how everything's going to work. Otherwise, it's a mess. And you hear about films that go into reshoots and other things. And a lot of times, sometimes when they reshoot a movie or do new scenes or it's really reshoots, it's not because the film's terrible. It's just maybe that it wasn't the right tone they thought it was. I mean, I would hope you get that in the script. That's why you have to every element should be building on the next element. There's a general attitude of you make 3 movies when you make a film. There's the film you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit. And it's true, but my philosophy is that, but it's more really you improve upon the film on each step. The script should be amazing. Then you shoot something and it's better than what the script was, and then when you cut it, it's better than what you shot. And it's not like you shouldn't be 3 different things. It should be just getting better and better and better. And that's again having the confidence that the script is going to work. And sometimes you put your all into something and you have the best people and the audience just doesn't react the way you think it does. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's just completely out of your hands and out of your control. There are movies I've seen that I thought would do really well that I liked, and then they just didn't do well. Because the zeitgeist was, we don't want to see another one of those movies. Or we don't feel like, whatever. But it's a series of compromise.
Compromise and listening to you talk about compromise, it sort of does fall into that ultimate Obama quote, although he didn't invent it, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Because if you can't accept compromise, and by the way, you do mention compromise, but of course I loved what you said about, each stage it can get better. And what makes it better really is collaboration, right? Like if the script's perfect and then you get on set and then you have actors that bring a little something more, it goes up a level. And there's crew that, better ideas, better ways. The director finds inventive ways to tell the story more effectively, then it gets better. And then if you have a talented editor, then everything can get better. And you add, of course, all the stuff you add in post makes things better, whether it's score or some effects or just timing. Absolutely. It's but if you have the right people collaborating, like you said, sometimes audiences don't care at all, but the work can get better each time, and it's because it's collaborative. If it was just one person the whole way through, I bet it really can't scale up as well because it's all inside the same mind.
No.
But I wanted to ask you a question.
It helps to, yeah.
No, I'm just going to jump back to you because I think you threw in a nugget.
No, it's fine.
Half an hour ago, I think you said 8mm. So did you actually get your hands on an 8mm film camera as a kid, like Super 8 or something, and play around with it?
Well, it was it was Super 8. Yeah, it was terrible. They're terrible movies that don't exist anymore. I can tell you that much. It was like
for those who don't know,
there's a Super 8 camera.
There's 2 amazing lessons about Super 8, and of course and that was, first of all, you had to shoot stuff. And you couldn't watch it back till it was developed, like the old days. So, and of course, kids don't do dailies or anything. So it sort of taught a discipline of, I've got to get it right because I can't just watch it back and do it again. And then there is something really cool about playing with film. I don't know if you tried in camera editing as a kid or if you actually got, if you would develop the film and take a razor blade to it and some tape and play around with that. But
Well, yeah, I mean, my to be perfect, I'd be lying if I'd love to say I have like, Spielberg. He made like a bunch of films when he was a kid, and you look at him like, well, this guy clearly knew what he was doing, even as like a 12-year-old. I would love to say that. I can't, because I was, my dad was who I was sort of leaning on to help me with, and he was sort of like, well, we'll do this thing. So I didn't. There's nothing ever really got finished, and I would shoot stuff, and then you'd see pieces of stuff, and like I never really got into heavy editorial. Sadly, the technical side at that age, it just wasn't really my forte. I was more about like, well, we're going to build these things and we're going to create these sets. And it was more this weird interaction of like, it wasn't until, because growing up, there wasn't really video cameras. You had the film cameras. And in fact, even my visual effects career, 99% of it, we were shooting on film, whether it was 35 or we were running 35 through a VistaVision camera, getting a wider piece of film, or shooting IMAX. We shot some visual effects with IMAX. And so like a lot of the stuff we were doing was on film. And every motion picture camera, from like a Mitchell Freeze camera to a Wilcam, which is like this high-speed VistaVision camera, but it's all film. So it wasn't, we did some digital work later, but mostly film. So I've always been like in the film side of things. But to answer your question, not to bring it back to when I was a little kid, but because we shot on film, even in the visual effects and even in the world of digital photography and still working in film, you had to plan everything. And that's something that you brought up, I thought is very important. With digital cinema, both the camera and editorial being digital, you could do a lot of things. Quick. Oh, try this. And back in the day, when you're shooting on film, first of all, you only had, especially if you're making like small budget films or shorts, you only had so much film stock. And film stock was expensive. Developing it was expensive. And so you had to make your choices really buttoned up. Then comes editorial. Well, now you're cutting work print, but you're really focused on like, okay, do I want to make that cut there? It's not like, well, let's just try it, undo, Apple Z or whatever. It's not like you do that. And the editor I work with, Scott Hill, who's not only a terrific person, but he's an amazing editor. He started his career as a negative cutter. So negative cutter, I mean, you talk about being, miss one frame or you did the wrong thing, you're cutting real negative. And, he started his career also just, the films he's working, cutting film. So, there's a process to it. I think there's no such thing as the good old days, because it's not. I think technology improves everything. You mentioned about, and I don't want to talk a lot about it, but you'd said like, people still like practical effects. I don't know. I mean, the digital work nowadays some of it is so amazing and so good and so seamless that I don't necessarily know if it's not as good as practical work. I think that you can kind of do anything now. I think the real impetus to do a good effect shot is having good shot design and good concept for it. Because you can use any tool to tell the best story. It's coming up with something that's just believable and you're in the emotion of it. Because that's the other thing. If you're not on board with the characters emotionally, then it doesn't matter what the effects are. You can have the most amazing visual effects in a film, but if people don't care about the movie, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to care. I mean, there are the wow factor films, the giant, like big action movies, but even then, you put a character in there you care about, that action movie goes from like, oh, it's pretty good to, oh my God, it was amazing. It's like, well, it's the same movie, but you really like the people. If you feel that they're in peril, or you're rooting for them or rooting against them, depending who they are, then I think you have a much better shot at telling a convincing story and better sequence. The last thing I'll say about effects on that is that there's a lot of hype. And I see it on Twitter. And there's just a number of effects people I follow who are extraordinarily talented. And there's this hype, and it drives me crazy because digital work is so commonplace. I mean, kids go to school with an iPad. So like everything is digital. Your phone, you have more computing power than most of the Apollo spacecraft. It's like all this stuff is so much more modern that there's this thing where somebody has makeup effects or practical. They put out this press release. It was all done practically. It was all done with, and it was like, well, it wasn't. Anybody who knows anything can see it. It's not like the what is it? Stranger Things, the newest season 4. And there's the character of Vecna, and it's a full prosthetic suit. It's very well done. It's terrific. It's on the actor who played the character he turns into. But when you watch it, they've overlaid, and I can't remember sadly who did the makeup effects or digital work, I would give them credit, but they overlay these like moving vines and pulsing like vein work roots, and it's fantastic. It's a beautiful combination of practical and digital. But then the article comes out and says it's all done practically. It's like, well, it's clearly not all done practically. But the problem is now you have all these digital people who are going, how dare you? You're stepping on all our digital work, and this is unfair, and it's ridiculous. Now, mind you, I feel their pain. But I also feel the pain of doing practical effects back when digital was a new thing. And we were lucky to sit at the kids' table in the world of visual effects when we did miniatures. 90% of the time, we were never on the Academy ticket for the bake-off because it's like, oh yeah, there's some models in the movie. Models, 99% of the shot is in camera, and you added did some paint outs of wires or added a character in the foreground. So I get where it's a promotional thing, it's a marketing thing. But I always feel like I want to chime in on these Twitter feeds and say, by the way, I do appreciate and understand the pain of not getting the credit or feeling you're being undersold. But it's always been like that. Titanic, the cover of cover of Time magazine had Titanic in '97 when it came out and said the all digital Titanic. It's not all digital. 90% of that movie, if not 99% of the movie, are miniature effects, A scale, like 20th scale Titanic motion control model, A scale high speed model, breaks in half. They had some very innovative digital passengers walking around, and they did some amazing composite work. But the bulk of what you remember in that film, it was practical in miniature. And then, of course, what James Cameron did down in Rosarita, in the big Rosarita tank, were these humongous sets of a giant Titanic, 3/4 scale or 3/4 built. And anyway, it's all about marketing.
I am of a time. I think I'm only like a year or two older than you, but I am of a time too. Like, I mean, when I think of Titanic and other films as well, where people made a big deal about the digital still wasn't up to par. Like when I think of Titanic, a beautiful shot of it on the ocean is too consistent for me, right? They hadn't figured out variation to make it look more natural. And the people walking around on deck who were digital, for me, the digital stuff in that didn't work. What the amazing thing was that Cameron built a massive tank and he did like a 3/4 scale actual ship in that tank that they could move around and have real water. I mean, the practicals. But I was just going to share that I am of a certain age where I grew up, of course, everything was practical when we were kids, whether it was 2001 and the original Star Wars trilogy and all that. And then, I'll just bring up the obvious topic of the special edition Star Wars, where all of a sudden there was digital shit next to practical. And I just hated the aesthetics of things that look incredibly sharp and clean next to stuff that looks natural to my eye, and just. But now I totally agree. Well, it's turned a corner, but for a good.
But it brings up. It's true. It brings up two things. So so I say film's a series of compromise, making films. It's also you got to pick your battles. So. And I used to tell when people would come to us back in the day talking about effects, how would you do this sequence? I would say, all right, we can either give you something that's 100% photoreal and is really compelling and you love, or if you go a route, which is, and this is 10, 15 years ago, but it's 100% digital, you may find that you get your vision on the screen, but people don't buy it. In other words, so pick what you want. Do you want to say, well, I have this vision where I want the camera to do this and go around and it comes around the character and then we do this huge pullback, it's 1,000,000 miles and we never have enough dolly track to really do it or whatever. And so it's like, okay, that's great. But the question is it going to take the audience out of the story? Is it all of a sudden going to be like, well, that was like an effect that was terrible? Or do you say, okay, let me use what I can conventionally and push the digital to as far as it will go technologically, but not break the illusion? I think that there was a time with digital work where it was still a very developmental stage. So people were just trying to do everything they could to do as much as they could and explore the material. And what happened was you had shots, admittedly, that, okay, that's not a great digital shot, but you learn something in the process from the rendering to the modeling to whatever, and then they could build upon that on the next show. And by the way, there's some pretty god-awful practical effects too. It's not like, I've seen some work and I'm very proud of the work we did at New Deal Studios, and I to be perfectly honest, I can't think of anything that I'm like embarrassed about. Not by any means. I really love the stuff that we had done for all the filmmakers we worked with. But there are shows I'll look back where you look back at older films that are 30, 40, 50 years old, and it's like they didn't have fast enough lenses, or they didn't shoot high enough frame rate, or the scale wasn't big enough. It was a destruction sequence, and it looked modelly. I mean, you could tell, but everything is give and take. Audiences are very, very sophisticated now, and when somebody with their home computer and their phone can do shots that sometimes could rival the studio, it's like, well, there's your answer. The technology is very accessible, and so that's the thing. But
absolutely,
you're pointing out feeling always.
I was just going to say, you're pointing out that technology develops at all times, and I mean, also when right before my era, practical stuff and models always looked fake, and Hollywood didn't care because movies were still magical and they still own the movie theaters. So they would just, do what we would today call low budget, but it was just, they just were like, it doesn't have to look real. It's a movie is what they would say. And then of course and then 2001, I think probably is the one that turned it around and said, no, it can look amazing.
Yeah.
And then the goal was to look amazing for a while. And then of course the Star Wars trilogy was amazing with models and all kinds of miniatures and things. And then, digital came in. Yeah, you made me think of, when you go from, I think, Ang Lee's Hulk with Ed Norton. Was it Ed Norton playing it in Ang Lee? No, it was Ed Bana.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Eric
Bana.
Yeah. And like how not convincing that little digital Hulk was as he ran around. And then 10, 15 years later, we have the Ruffalo Hulk that is so detailed and realistic that he can sit and have a conversation as the Hulk in that last end game, and just just amazing development in the technology, in their ability to just remove our suspension of disbelief.
And that's exactly what it is. It's the development. It's a development of technology, and you wouldn't get the modern Hulk without the older. But I got to tell you though, you go back, look at Jurassic Park, the first one, 93, or look at the dinosaurs, particularly the T-Rex at night in the rain. Stuff is amazing. It's amazing. And there's shots nowadays that sometimes don't look as good as that. Or the pinpoint one that I always like to talk about is the Davy Jones character in the Pirates of the Caribbean, I think Pirates of the Caribbean 2. And it's the squid face, and got the squid. When I saw that, I was like, well, that's some pretty great practical stuff. Like, I had no idea it was 100% CG. Couldn't tell. To this day, you can't tell. It's so well done. It's so well. The lighting is great. The composite work is great. The animation is great. And that movie is 15 years old. And so I think that everything has its pros and cons, and it's knowing when to use the technology, when not. But if you're a digital effects company, if you're Rhythm and Hues or ILM, or at the time, Cinesight was one of the companies out in LA, and you're developing, or Weta for that matter, who does amazing creature work, it's digital, and you're developing stuff, it's like you're not going to say, well, we don't think it's good enough. You're going to push those boundaries, and you're going to stretch it as far as you possibly can to get it to work as best as you can. I don't know of any visual effects person that's like, nah, it's not as good as it could. And like, everybody tries, and it's also, you're trying to develop stuff. That's the thing people never understand. It's so easy to look at a show and go, that digital work was terrible. It's like, yeah, but they're inventing it as they go along, and you never have enough money or R&D to do what you need to do. So what happens is you work on a show and you use that money and time to develop something, hoping it works for that. But then in your back pocket, all right, the next show we're going to build upon that, and you try to build upon what you learned on the last show. But it's just a hard, and the business has completely changed. It's so different now. The deadlines are crazier. The expectations are crazier. The way people make money is crazier. It's all different. It's different than when I came up to do the business. That's for sure.
All right. So now because effects and this topic has been central to your career for decades, I've allowed you to not talk about the fact that you still, in spite of running a successful business in the industry, in effects, really doing everything in that world, you still kept writing, right? And at some point you said, I am going to make a pirate film. You wrote something and decided to make it. And obviously the only thing that made you do that was something inside you, because you could have just focused on the business and not expressed yourself.
Sure. Well, I've always made commercials and shorts, and even a few years back, had an opportunity to direct two small features, which are in sort of like an interminable post. Apparently, they're great movies. They're two westerns, and they're terrific. One of them had Robert Patrick in it as the villain, and they're great movies. Hopefully, the producer and who's also the lead of the film will finish them because they're really good movies. And this guy, he's not like a known actor. This guy who started it did a great job. He's really good at it. So I've had opportunities to make films, and I've had opportunities to explore shorts and other things. But I was always beholden to somebody else. I've been attached to big Hollywood movies to direct, and then the financing drops out or the opportunity changes. That's something else. In terms of, it's a long haul. You've got to be patient. You've got to have thick skin and deal with a lot of disappointment. But everything I'd ever done in the business regarding getting attached to features, or even doing like proof of concepts for features that worked really well and got great views on YouTube or whatever, it was always beholden to someone else. And I was getting tired of going, I just made a movie that cost nothing in no time. It looks like it cost 100 times what we made, but it's not finished. Or I was attached to a film that was going to be a $100 million science fiction picture based on a 1970s, television series, and everybody's excited, and then the money disappears. So it's like, and you spend a lot of time. I mean, I have tons of development working with writers, or writing myself, or doing concept art and all this other stuff. So I have a development company called Proof of Concept Entertainment with a good friend named Joe Kanarick, and he's a terrific writer. He's got a writing partner named Ryan Godet, and I've worked with them for years. And I said, well, let's develop stuff. Let's get things going. We've got a project, if I have the moment, I'll talk about a little bit, that we're hoping to close the financing on this year, shoot before the end of the year. But in the meantime of all that, I just wanted to make something. I just wanted to get a film made that didn't. So the development process is terrific. It's a lot of fun. It's great to develop the script. It's great to do the concept art. It's great to do all of that. But I'm somebody who spent my life, and been talking about when I was a kid, making things. And so developing something's terrific, but that's not the means. The means to the end is to get a thing physically made. So Mutiny was that. It was like, okay, because Joe and I had a project, which we still have, called The War of Elias, which is a really cool supernatural thriller that deals with, it's really a psychological thriller that deals with a lot of internal demons, external demons. It's a great thing. And we were going to do it as a mobile web series. We got the green light. We developed it. We had 6 months of development, all this stuff. And then the company decided, we're not putting our money there. And then they stopped doing any content. And it was like, Anyway, so at that point, I'm like, I got to make something. So that's really what inspired Mutiny to make a thing. So I'm like, I'm just gonna make a thing that I know I can pay for. I can write. I can direct. I can oversee the post. I can do some of the visual effects if need be. And that really was what the impetus of Mutiny was, because I was just tired of saying to somebody, I made these two films and they're amazing, and they are. And the acting's great, and it is. Well, where can I see it? Well, they're not done yet. I have no control over the distribution and release. Or I made a proof of concept for a film based on an anime project, which was amazing. They don't want to do the movie. So it's like you have these pieces of all these things, or you're attached to stuff that is, the next best thing, but until it gets made, you're still just waiting. So that was, just to be blunt with all of it, that's the reason I made Mutiny. I just wanted to make a thing and just with it. But because I unfortunately, for better or for worse, can't just shoot two people talking in a room, I'm like, well, I'm going to do something that's action adventure. I want to throw the comedy in that I'd like to develop, and and I'll build a boat, and I'll do all sort of nonsense in it. The stuff I know, it's in my wheelhouse, and that's why I made the film. And I had an amazing time making it. All the actors in here are unbelievable. Most of them I'm good friends with. I've known for years. But that's why I made it. It was just because the thing is, if I can give you another 2 cents of advice to any filmmaker out there, do whatever you can to make something. Develop, right, but if you can make a thing, make it. Just make it, even if it's not, it could be, but just make it, get it out there, get people to react to it. Problem is I'm a little too OCD, and I have a very high threshold of like quality, and I have extraordinarily high expectations. So like for Mutiny, I'm like, well, it's got to look good, and it's got to be photographed well, the costume's got to look great. So I'm I've been poisoned by working on all these big Hollywood movies to then turn something around that looks like it's me shooting it in my bedroom with an iPhone. By the way, could probably shoot somebody who's 20 years old or 15 years old, probably shoot something that's far more compelling than Mutiny and may get more attention. But the reality is how I work. It's like I want to make something that has legacy and stands the test of time. And that's why Mutiny sort of looks the way it does. And I was extraordinarily fortunate. AJ Raitano, who's a DP, is a great guy I've worked with for years. He did an amazing job. He was B camera as well as a director of photography. Our A camera is a gentleman by the name of Nick Waugh, who's an unbelievable Steadicam operator who I can't imagine shooting a film without these guys. And then Scott Hill is our editor who did. He's more than the editor. He's like the post supervisor, frankly, and he did unbelievable. Not just the editing. But I always joke that without him, I just shoot a bunch of stuff, and he makes it look like a real movie. But he dealt with the sound, and he oversaw that, and he oversaw the color, and he did color himself, and it was crazy. And then I'm just doing these 2-bit like plugs he would do. Joy Niao, who is the composer and created all the music, like that's talk about like an emotional impact. If the music wasn't what it was in the film, I think the film would still play, but it would not play anywhere near as well. Music like is the biggest cheat I have in that because the music's so good and what she brought to the table made the film like elevated. It didn't matter how it looked, didn't matter that at that point it's like the music really brought you into it. It was exactly what I wanted. And then all the actors and stuff. But in the extraordinarily unusually not unusual long-winded answer, that's why I made it, because I wanted to make something. I was tired of like waiting for funders or financing or a studio to greenlight a thing. And by the way, that's the process. Getting money is really hard, and getting movies to be greenlit is really hard. So I understand and appreciate that process. But I fortunately have had a really great career working with great creative people, and I know the confines of what had to make something. So I was like, I just got to do it. That way I'm not beholden. As I always say, if you don't like it, I'm to blame. So that's it.
For sure. And because of your career over the previous 25, 30 years, you were able to bring something to Mutiny that you couldn't have when you first got to town, right? So you certainly, your toolbox was much larger than, but I totally agree with you. People should make things. They should shoot it. And if they can, at the script stage, most people write it in a manner that they can accomplish it, whether it's financially or sets or locations, whatever. And in your case, when you were writing Mutiny, you were like, well, I know how to do so many things. How did you limit yourself? Or were you not in that world of limiting yourself? Or did you write it to know like, okay, this is, I can definitely pull this off for a budget that my wife can live with?
Yes and yes. I wrote exactly the film. You read the script, it's shot. I mean, I did 265 storyboards for the film. So every single moment of that film, I'm like, this is how it's going to look. There was now this is one of those things where the only compromise was that we got pushed twice because of unseasonable rain in Los Angeles. That was the only there was not one thing on there like, I wish we could have. Nope. If I had 5 times the budget, I would have made the same move. And you're absolutely right. Excuse me. Everything I've learned in the past as a filmmaker on the technical side, I applied. But the irony is, I probably would have written that script 20 years ago. It's my stupid voice or my perspective or how I do. It's like, it wasn't like, now I know. Like, no, the cheesy jokes and all the other stuff in it that I find funny, I found funny when I was in my teens. So, and I don't think any of it's, and the funny thing is I do like writing drama and I do have an understanding of things that are far more serious, but I just wanted something that was fun to make. And as I mentioned, it is a very subtle political commentary because it was written at, August of 2019, right before the 2020 election. So it was kind of, done in that in that vein of like, so it has very subtle political comment to it, but
and 2019,
I just want to make
I can place 2019 as, in my mind, a very healthy thing was happening in the world, in our culture, and specifically in the industry with Me Too. So you certainly you certainly address women's rights and gender equality in your script. You sort of modernize that.
Without hitting people over the head, though. That was something of
Yes.
a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, very talented, and she said, she made it. She said, if you really want to like get into festivals, you really gotta like hit it harder. And I said, it's not my stuff. She said, you don't understand. Sometimes people need it. I said, well, I get it, but that's not what this is about. I don't want to turn this into a political piece. I don't want it to become, the socially conscious piece. I said, it's there. It's just not. It's not heavy-handed, and it shouldn't be. If you're entertained by it, you may stop and go, "Oh yeah, that is. I get it now." But if you hit it too hard, then people just roll their eyes. Oh, I'm being told, I'm being lectured, and I didn't want to do that. And also, the story didn't need that for what it was.
No, and also, I think you use something as a storyteller very wise, which is I think your audience. I don't think it's a major spoiler. Can I say what this was? It's not a major spoiler that there is a woman disguised as a man. But besides using that,
you see the
and besides the
poster, it's clear on the poster,
Yeah. So, but besides the humor in it and other things, I think you were also so smart to know that the audience would instinctively root for her, root for your woman, like whereas in a more sexist era, that person might be dismissed. But yeah, I mean, the fact that she is there and funny and smart and a brilliant sword fighter, I think we automatically root for that character.
Yes, exactly. And it does follow, historically, women were not allowed to be crew on those ships, and they would disguise themselves as men. That's Anne Bonny, Mary Read. These are, very historically memorable pirates, and they would do things because, they felt, women on ships are a distraction to men. And then, of course, there's obviously the incredible misogyny of I could say of that time, of still now time. I'm not even getting into the politics of where we are right now in regards to people's rights. It's pretty god awful. But nonetheless, somebody told me when I was making Mutiny, by the way, they're going to strip these rights away from these people. I'd say, that's funny. No, that's you're not. But yeah, so yeah, it's a fight that has to happen every day. The fight with anybody's rights being revoked and things changed it's pretty scary actually. But I don't want to start going down that path. Not that I don't want to talk about it, but your podcast is not really about that.
Well, it's also but
needless to say, we could
if you wanted to, but also we're two middle-aged white males, so I don't even think the world really needs to hear us talk about women's rights. We should be supportive allies, and
absolutely.
And I should, if only I knew of there's some filmmakers actually who have their own podcasts, and I can't name them off the top of my head except one. I'm forgetting her last name, but Bree, a woman. She runs her. If you look up the podcast, My Dead Parents, it's a wonderful podcast from a female perspective about losing your parents when you're young. So anyway, but I don't know. I tried to rescue my thought there that someday I should probably have a panel together of female filmmakers to discuss what it's like to do the festival circuit from that perspective. And, gender nowadays is an important topic. So I'm glad you hit it. I'm glad it's part of your film. And I know, and if people want to, and funny, we didn't have to dive into Mutiny that much, but if someone wants to hear Matthew and actually see him talk a little deeper about Mutiny, the Q&A from the theater in June is online. So if you just go to filmvasionla.com and go to the Q&As for 2022, you can see us talk all about it. And actually a couple of cast members up on stage with you, sitting in chairs, discussing all the weather insanity and the fact that you still got it done.
I completely forgot you have. I apologize. I completely forgot you have all of that, and wasting your
although it's
precious
funny, some people
podcast
said, "Do you want to
repeating
just pull my Q&A for the thing?" I'm like, "Well, but the Q&A is just about the film, really, whereas the podcast is more
Sure.
about your personal history." I sort of create that delineation in my mind, but I don't. And also, you've been on the festival circuit, I think, long enough with Mutiny that you're even tired of talking about it. I don't know.
No, I to be honest, it's been fun, and I really like seeing. There's nothing better, and I have to thank you for putting on Film Invasion Los Angeles for no other reason other than it's an impossible amount of work. But it was a live experience. I got to show the film for an audience, and I had to say, as somebody making movies, it's great to have stuff online. It's great to see comments. It's great but sitting in an audience with people, projecting the film, nothing beats that. There is nothing that can compare, because you get it. It's just like I said earlier. You get a real world understanding instantaneously of how it works, how it doesn't work, what works, and how people react. So again, great job. The festival was fun. I'm really
especially for comedy, right? I mean, my God, for comedy to have a live audience, to sit with an audience and hear those audience reactions and being a part of the audience for a comedy, I think is critical. I certainly, as a festival programmer, I love watching everything, of course, with an audience. It's much better than screening through things home alone on a TV as you're part of the selection jury. But comedy is
100%. It's a social
and horror. Comedy and horror are the best things to share with others, because drama, we're Americans, so we're not supposed to feel too much. So you feel touched, but you keep it to yourself. Yeah, when you shift to comedy, right, sharing that laugh is everything.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And it's a social experience. It's an unbelievably social experience, which it should be. So, it's great. Now, it's great.
And do you want to talk about, I guess it's a given for me that Mutiny was really the first step towards a series of sorts, right? Like, you have long-term plans for these characters.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yes. I did cover a lot of that in the Q&A, but just very briefly, I had written it in 2019, and I thought it had the same style and humor as something that Taika Waititi would do. And I thought it would be great to pitch him as a series. We made the movie. The pandemic happened. We finished the film, and then in October of 2020, it was announced that Taika was going to star and produce this David Jenkins created Our Flag Means Death for HBO, a pirate comedy series. So it was like a little wind was taken out of my sails a little bit on that, going, oh wow, that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. But the reality is, they got the show being picked up for season 2. I've tried lobbying to get on as a director or something. I think they probably have their slate put together of leads for directing and such. But yeah, no, I mean, I still have it developed as a series. I've got 8 episodes. I've got the 2nd and 3rd episode written, and the others are all outlined. Does the world want a second pirate series? I have no idea. But regardless, the most important thing of that experience, which a lot of people never get the chance, is that, I mean, you could name thousands of writers or directors who have developed a project, spent years on it perhaps, and just as they're going to go pitch it, somebody comes out, oh yeah, Warner Brothers is doing the next whatever, and you're like, oh, but I just spent, and then they can't do anything with it. So the fortunate thing is, we made Mutiny as a short, and at least I have that, and I can say, oh well, if it doesn't get as done as a series, I'd be disappointed, but it's like, okay, I get it. That's you having another competing series to Our Flag Means Death or something very similar. The thing that's crazy is that the short has similarities, but how I developed the other 8 episodes are extraordinarily similar. And it's a complete and 100% coincidence, because nobody's ever seen the scripts except for our editor and one of the actors. Nobody from their show saw anything I wrote beyond the short. So it's just a coincidence. So either maybe it's the zeitgeist of where everything is going on now or something. But yeah, so that's that. But I am funny enough to go the complete opposite of Mutiny. the film that I'm hoping my partner Joe and I can close the financing on, we're hoping this year, is it's a social thriller, not a comedy by any means. It's a female-centric film that is a ghost story that deals with domestic abuse. By no means a comedy. So that's it's called The Remains, and we're pretty excited about that. We're hoping that gets funded, and we hope to shoot that before the end of this year. Our producing partner, Jonathan Sanger, who is absolutely terrific. He's actually very, very well known. He's done a lot of terrific movies. His first big film, which is, I can't imagine having your first film be The Elephant Man, and then you get nominated for an Oscar. That's like your first film as a producer. So you can only go up from there. But he's done an amazing amount of work in Hollywood for years and years and years. He's got a movie he's finishing post on called Cabrini, which will be coming out, I guess, next year at some point. But he's our producing partner, and I just hope we can get it made this year. Sadly, it's an evergreen story because domestic abuse is not anything that's going to go away at any time soon. But it's not solely about that. It's a ghost story first and foremost, and it's a really compelling story, and not Mutiny, that's for sure. Not the same kind of film, but I think people will really get something out of it.
Sounds great. All right. Well, any website or social media that people should hit up to learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. Easiest thing. There's links to all of it. My website is just MatthewGratzner.com or at Matthew Gratzner on Twitter and Instagram is easy. And it's all interconnected, so it's pretty straightforward. The MatthewGratzner.com website's kind of cool, only because it shows the body of work I've done. And if somebody's interested in visual effects and design and shorts, everything I've done is on there. So it's kind of cool to see it. I guess for me, selfishly, it's cool. But more importantly, if somebody's like, oh, how did they do this shot? I have some behind the scenes videos from like Shutter Island and other things. And it's the reason I find it's a good source because all the stuff I've done, I put into just basically the one site. So if there's any interest in any of it, then you can see it. Even if you're not interested in my directing, there's some really cool stuff for visual effects and some other things. But yeah.
Very cool. And I can't help but note that you were blessed with an uncommon last name in order to get your MatthewGratzner.com and at Matthew Gratzner. Lord knows those of us with two first names had to act pretty early to get something with our name in it because, boy. But yeah, that's great. That's great. That makes it pretty easy.
However, Mr. Howard, at least people can pronounce your names, both of them. When we had our first company, it was called Hunter Gratzner Industries, and it was named after Ian Hunter, my partner, and of course I'm Matt Gratzner. And Industries, the running joke was always our partner Shannon Gans, because she was the business of it all. But I cannot tell you how many hand-addressed labels, emails, phone calls, they completely just brutalized my last name. So it may be unique, and it may have been good for getting a website, but you'd be hard-pressed to believe how many people can't pronounce it. So that's okay. It's all right.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do?
All right. Well, so MatthewGratzner.com. And for those who don't need it, for those who need it, Gratzner. I guess it's the TZN that would throw off. I don't know who that would throw off. It's pretty damn phonetic. But anyway.
It's a little clunky. I get it. I mean, it's not like, like I said, Jeff Howard is a great name. That's like a 1940s action hero. Jeff Howard here to save your day. Jeff Howard. Like it'd be Jeffrey though. If you were an action film from that era, golden age, it'd be Jeffrey. Jeffrey Howard stars in the Treasure of the Saints or some other.
Hey, I appreciate you saying Jeffrey instead of Jeffrey because I'm an REY. And every once in a while, paperwork comes into me that's spelled ERY, and I'm like, "Oh, come on, man!" But anyway, I'll get over it.
Jeffrey. That is, by the way, that is short for. That is, I think, a Southern slant to the name because I think Jeffrey ERY is short for Jefferson, as in like the ex-president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. I don't know if his folks used to call him Jeffrey or Jeff or whatever back when he was cultivating, the slave traders. Remember that horrible time in American history was. But yeah, Jeffrey or Jeff Uri is, I think, short for Jefferson.
That makes sense.
Version. I think it's like from the South. Yeah.
Actually, one of the cuter nicknames a woman ever gave
good.
me was I had a good friend named Andy, and I was Jeff, and she called me Jefferson, and then she called him Anderson. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cute. She's got the cute thing nailed down.
That's okay. Well, that's okay if you're looking at like a more of a leaning on a Thomas Jefferson, I guess. But yeah, you probably don't want to be compared to Jefferson Davis. Not a real popular character in America.
No, I think of Thomas.
Not somebody
Jefferson.
You want to model yourself after.
Yeah, my mind definitely goes.
Although
to Thomas
apparently he was he had his issues too. So it's not founding father, sure, but didn't mind owning people. Apparently.
Oh, he was of his time. Yeah, that gets complicated. Well, here I am going to name all the websites and social media handles for everyone. So first of all, we talked about Mutiny winning the Filmmakers Award for Outstanding Short Film Comedy at Film Invasion Los Angeles. That is a festival held every June in Sherman Oaks, so you can learn more about it if you go to filminvasionla.com, and on social media it's at filminvasionla. I actually threw out that it's in a theater in the neighborhood of Sherman Oaks. There's a sister festival every November called the Sherman Oaks Film Festival, and you can learn more about that at shermanoaksff.com, and it's at Sherman Oaks FF on social media. And I'll mention the last thing that was born out of this podcast. This podcast did give birth to a TV series that is on Amazon Prime Video. We will find out someday if you get to see Mutiny on there, but either way, go to Matthew's website and learn more about Mutiny and his stuff. But if you go to Amazon Prime Video and search for Discover Indie Film, you will find, at this point, 6 seasons of wonderful short films handpicked from the festival circuit. Every season's 10 episodes, around half an hour an episode, so there's 2 or 3 shorts per episode. There are some episodes that are 1 short now, because shorts just keep getting longer. In fact, in season 6, there's a 40-minute and a 45-minute, so man, but they are good. So anyway, do that, and if you want to learn more about the podcast or the TV series, it's discoverindiefilm.com, and on social media, it's at DIFwins. And I think that wraps it up. Matthew, thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for the time, and I really appreciate it. I'm excited that, like I said, I got to be a part of all of this.
I'm glad to have you. And for those who haven't figured it out by being a fan of the podcast, Matthew and I are going to stop talking. I'm going to stop recording on Zoom. And then we're going to start recording again, and Matthew's going to answer the Discover Indie Film 4 questions. So I think you picked up during this interview that he's a bit of a film buff. He's got a nice history of films put into his mind starting at age 5. So, hey, I'm looking forward to your list, and I will thank you one last time, and I will thank everyone for listening.